Hello, I'm Anne Montague. I'm the psychological support lead in the family support team at Dorothy House.
And I'm Donna. I'm the children and families practitioner. I'm a social worker and support children therapeutically.
And today we are going to be talking about children, life-limiting illness and bereavement. And we will be talking about how to talk to your child or young person about life-limiting illness, about death, how to recognise and understand their grief, and how you can support them best. So Donna, I think what we both know from working here is that if there is one group that really, where people become very anxious, very worried, it's children and young people. Top of the list are probably parents, aren't they? If somebody gets a diagnosis, where do they start in having those kind of conversations with their children and with their teenagers?
I think for families it can be quite difficult because they really do want to get it right, and actually they're going to be sharing something that's quite distressing, maybe something that actually their parents are coming to terms with as well. So I think it is important for parents to reflect and to think carefully about how they're going to approach this. What we would say is the importance of being honest and open with children, even though it's very, very difficult. It's probably one of the most difficult conversations that any parent is going to have. We can't take away the sadness of what they're going to hear. They are going to feel sad. We can't remove that. But we can actually make children feel safer. So if the child is going to hear that their parent's not going to get better from their illness and that maybe they're going to die, that actually that might conjure up all kinds of questions for children about who's going to look after me, what's going to happen, and that feels really, really scary. If children have information, then they can feel safer. They won't feel less sad, they're not going to feel less distressed, but they feel safer that the adults are holding it. And having that conversation is really complex. It's not as straightforward as saying a few words, that parents might need to really think about what they want to say. They might want to have conversations within their family or with their friends or even professionals at Dorothy House.
It's usually not just one big sit-down conversation. It's a process of having many conversations over a period of time.
Yeah, it's bite-sized chunks, isn't it? That's how I would describe it, that in a manageable way for children and young people, not to overwhelm them, giving children, young people a space where they can ask questions or come back if they want to. Yeah, so it can't just be everything all in one go. And for patients, they might kind of not know something. So how can they tell their children what they don't know of themselves?
Yeah, but it's about honesty, isn't it? It's about being honest. And I guess, one of the things that I know comes up is sometimes parents thinking that it should be a health professional or somebody else that tells their children.
I think it's got to be somebody from the family, maybe the parent, maybe the parent being supported within the family, because that is the person that their children trust.
And who knows their child best.
Who knows their child best.
Yeah.
And actually, when things feel out of control, this is something that parents can control. They can control this information, and sharing it often is a relief.
Yeah.
And it can bring peace of mind to people as well.
And what I'm aware of, what people ask us a lot is, what do I say? Don't know where to start. That's always a big thing, isn't it? How do you start that conversation? And I suppose what I'm also aware of is that we often say to people, children know something's wrong. They might not know exactly what, but they do know. So where do parents start in having that conversation?
I think it is from that place of honesty, because what we don't want is for children to start imagining the worst, and that is really frightening for children, and they start filling the gaps themselves. I mean, maybe for parents. They need to sit down either with friends and family or maybe even someone from the family support team here and just have a conversation about what they're going to say. They might even want to role play it. It often helps. Some planning around it. When is that conversation going to happen? How are they going to adapt it to different ages within the family? There might be, might have several children.
Do they talk to all the children together? Do they talk to them one at a time? I know you often say a good place to start is finding out what they know or what they think is happening.
Yeah, that is a really important question, because often children, they are tuned in and they do know something is not right, and children often do give us cues in other ways, or parents say to us that children have asked questions, so they kind of know something that's going on. Starting with the child and asking them, well, what do you know about mummy or daddy or granny's illness is a really good place. And having conversations early. Yeah. That's important, really. Yes.
Because I guess the thing is that there's never a right time. There's never a good time, because it's a conversation no parent ever wants to have. But as you say, we know that children feel safer and do better if they're kept in the loop, if they feel as though they know what's going on in an age-appropriate way, obviously.
Because it's really scary if you don't know what's happening. And children can blame themselves. They might think, is it something I've done to make this happen? And they haven't got the full story. So they can't really understand or put meaning to the situation. And that can be quite distressing. And sometimes it can be traumatic for children.
Yeah, what they're imagining. We always say, don't we? If people don't know something, they'll make it up.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit about how children might react, children and young people, because I imagine the way they react will depend on the character of the child, but also perhaps on their age. So what kind of things can parents expect, and what kind of questions might they expect to get from their child?
I think each child is unique and children can react in different ways. We might get children that are quite withdrawn and are trying to avoid the distress of what they're hearing, and actually that's normal.
Yeah.
That's okay for them to feel like that, and that takes a lot of energy to kind of keep that out of your mind.
Yes.
And you might get children that are in school or even at home, and these thoughts are just popping up in their minds constantly, and that can affect their concentration. They might not be sleeping very well. They might be quite clingy. They might not want to go to school. It can vary across the age range, really. I'm thinking about really young children, and they might not cognitively understand what's happening, but actually they feel very insecure. So they might be really latching on to the parent, maybe regressing. But if we're thinking about primary school children and teenagers, that it's equally distressing for them, or if they're avoiding thinking about what's really happening, they might start spending more time out of the house, or they might be in their bedroom a lot more. There's lots of different ways that children can react, and it's quite variable and unique, but some of it in those early days is quite normal, or even in early weeks. It's quite normal sometimes for children, young people to react in those ways.
Yeah. So Donna, when parents do sit down and have those conversations with their children, what are the range of responses they might expect?
I think it can vary between children, even within siblings in a household. You might have one child that says, oh, right, okay then, and can I go and play with my friends? You might have another child that withdraws and goes up into their bedroom. You might have another child that's really angry and breaks something or hits themselves or something that feels quite overwhelming. So it can be a number of different ways that children behave, and they're all quite not a normal reaction to what they're hearing. And some of the questions that they might ask might be, well, are you going to die?
How does a parent answer that one?
I think, again, we've got to go back to that honesty that maybe at some point that is going to happen or that will happen. But at the moment, what the doctors are doing, they're helping me with medicine, trying to keep things stable. And if something changes, then we will let you know.
Yeah. So all children will react very differently, even within a family. And I'm assuming also that children's understanding of what dying and death means also varies dramatically across the age range.
Well, absolutely, because if we think about children under 7, they really don't fully understand what death and dying is. So that they might need a lot more support with that. We might need to revisit conversations. We might need additional resources and maybe some books and things like that to help.
Which is something that you can help parents with.
Absolutely, yeah. I just think right across the age range, children, young people, as they understand things more, that, death and dying and hearing about that can have different impacts. For a teenager, they have reached a stage where they kind of really do understand what that means. They know it's permanent. That can be quite upsetting and distressing.
We should also talk about what parents need to do around schools, for example. I'm assuming it's a good idea to keep the school informed. I know there are some children that will go to school and won't want to talk about it. It's quite important to manage that process.
I think it's really important to manage that and to keep those lines of communication open with schools and with teachers and involving the child in that process as well, so that they know who they can turn to. So it might be helpful for all of the child's teachers to know something about what's happening, but there might be particular people that the child really does trust, teachers that they can go to, that if it's all feeling too much.
And I guess it's important also for the school to be able to respect where the child is. It's not uncommon, for example, for teenagers to go to school and not tell anybody what's happening, because that's their escape.
Yeah, it's, school can be children's safe haven or not. It just depends on the child. But for teenagers particularly, they're at that stage where they want to be the same as their peers and they don't want to appear to be different. And they might not want information about home being openly shared, and it's not unusual for teenagers to want to keep home and school quite separate. But it's not always, it's not a blanket kind of rule. It's not always the case, but it's quite usual for teenagers.
And I guess it goes back to what you were saying before about that honesty, about asking them what they want, how they want to do this, and for them to really feel supported in that, so that they have some sense of control in the situation.
I think that's the key word, isn't it? Control. So when everything else is out of control, it's important to give children, young people control over something, and school and sharing information and talking to them about what that's going to look like and involving them it's just essential. Sometimes children may need additional support, and that we do offer that help during those early conversations. And if children need some therapeutic intervention, or they're not coping, or maybe they've got more complex needs, children trying to find meaning around what's happening, then they might do that through play, they might do that through art, they might do that through storytelling, that sometimes they can't put that into words.
Parents hopefully will be having those conversations as early as possible. They'll be keeping children informed all the way through. They'll be keeping the conversation open by saying, is there anything you need to know? Do you want to talk about it? And when we get to the point where the person is nearing death, whether it's a parent, a grandparent, a sibling perhaps, what's really important for the parents to think of in relation to the children then?
I think it's really important to prepare children for what they might see. And as you said, involve them and asking them if they want to see the parents, they want to be maybe there at the end. Do they want to see the parent or the grandparent's body afterwards? Because some children do want to do that and they find it really helpful. Some children might not want to, but it's kind of asking those questions. Children need the opportunity to say goodbye to the person that they loved. And, sometimes here, the family support team do see children that have not had that opportunity to say goodbye. And, that's quite difficult for them. And they've got lots of questions to ask. And, they are helped to unravel it. But wouldn't it have been better for them to actually be there?
To have had that choice in
to
the
have
first
that
place.
Choice.
I know that a lot of adults find that idea really difficult. They find the idea of a child seeing someone when they're very, very ill, or seeing someone after they've died. I mean, a lot of adults find that difficult, and they find the idea of a child or a young person being in that situation very difficult. But it is really important that they have the choice.
The choice is really important, and it is, again, about having some control. The child is asked and they can respond. And if they say that they don't want to be there, and I mean, even simple questions such as, if mum or dad deteriorates overnight, do you want to be woken up? And do you want to be with them, or do you want to be left asleep and be told in the morning? Or it's those kinds of things. And I think that children really appreciate those conversations. And, children might say, oh, no, actually, if I'm asleep, or I want to stay asleep, you can tell me in the morning. But equally, other children, they don't want that. They want to know. So it's just thinking about those kinds of questions, as we would with an adult. We would ask an adult that, wouldn't we? We'd
exactly.
Say, what would you like us to do? Do you want us to telephone you? Or and so it's doing that in a simple way with children and young people.
But as you say, we would always do that with an adult. And this idea that children are not feeling things or experiencing it differently. They may express it differently, but they're experiencing the same things and need to be given the same choices and supported in that.
They do. And I think what we do know about children is that they do cope much better if they're kept informed, if they're included. As we said earlier, you can't take the sadness away, nothing can, but children who have information are not going to come up with all these scary stories that children do come up with.
So we just talked about how people struggle with the idea perhaps of children going to see someone who's really ill or seeing them after they've died. I think people have a similar struggle with the idea of children going to funerals. It used to be that children never went to funerals. And I think it's still something that people have questions about. What would you say about that?
Yeah, the topic of funerals can be quite difficult. I mean, I've certainly spoke to adults who lost a parent as a child, and they just didn't know anything about the funeral. They didn't even know what happened to their parent afterwards. They didn't know if they were buried or cremated.
I've heard that as well.
Lots, isn't it? And I think we've moved away from that a long way these days. And children, they really value being part of that celebration of that person's life that they really loved. Sometimes children want to read something, and they do manage it. They absolutely do manage it. And
if they don't want to go?
I think if they don't want to go, they don't want to go. That I've worked with children who haven't wanted to go, and sometimes they've needed something separate and maybe much further down the line. So it might be a few months down the line that they kind of want to mark their parents' death in some way, in a formal way. It might be, some people plant a tree or visit a special place. It's timely, it's in the child's time. They can manage that. Maybe at the time of the funeral it might have been too much for them to take in what was happening. But mostly, I think most children, if asked, do want to be involved. Sometimes families, especially if adults are really worried about if they can cope themselves, they might want a family friend or another relative to support with the children. Sometimes families invite the children to a celebration after the funeral ceremony. That's something that children quite like to do, and to be with their family and to be sharing that.
It goes back, doesn't it, to that thing of keeping them informed, giving them a choice, giving them a sense of control.
Yeah,
and listening to their voice. Yeah.
And children want to know what's happened to their loved one's body. They really do want to know, and they might want to know about cremation and burial and that kind of thing. And I think adults often talk to me about how they find it really difficult to talk about cremation and actually what is happening to a body. But it's finding ways to sensitively but truthfully speak to children about those things and giving them reassurance that actually their loved one's body is being looked after, that they're not hurting. And children often talk to me and get quite excited that sometimes they get necklaces and what they're going to do with their loved one's ashes and being really involved in that. And
it can keep a part of mum or dad or grandma with them. Yeah.
It's important.
And so after the person does die, parents or a grandparent, I think we see a lot of children whose parents have died. As you said, children experience grief, but they may express it differently. It may not be as obvious. It may be different to what people would expect as an adult, for example.
But children are different, aren't they? Because they're growing and developing. And so the child's mind or the child's brain just cannot hold that concentrated grief for long periods of time. They innately can't do that, so that they might do something called puddle jumping, so that one moment they're really distressed and crying and upset, which you would expect, but the next minute they're jumping out of that grief puddle and they're playing with their friends or they're preoccupied with something else. That is normal and natural. That's a normal part of children's healthy development, and swinging between that, it's natural and it's normal.
But it can sometimes feel bewildering for the people around them, can't it? And I think sometimes it can lead people to think that they don't understand or that they're not really feeling it. They're doing fine.
Yeah, I think we do hear that sometimes, that people might say, oh, actually, they're okay, they don't mention it. Well, I think if a child was doing that all the time, that would worry me. And what I would want to see is that jumping in and out of that puddle. Yeah. So that, if there was times where the child was upset and distressed, that's healthy, that's normal. And equally, getting on with everyday life of being a child is normal. So we want to see a swing between the two. If we weren't seeing any of that, then I would be quite worried.
Yes. And I suppose you said if they're not talking about the person, so they need to be given the opportunity to talk about the person.
I think absolutely. I think that the person that's not there anymore physically is still there in a spiritual sense, so that, it's keeping that person's memory alive, isn't it? It's, kind of marking occasions, maybe making memory boxes, talking about the person. That is really important, and we talk sometimes about that being continuing bonds, don't we? Yes. With that person, and that should go right through the childhood, really, right through, and just.
And I suppose it's even simple everyday stuff like should we make mum's favourite pasta?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and I think it's just so comforting. Yeah. For children.
But are the responses different when children are older, if we're talking about teenagers?
I think teenagers, they do want to keep their loved ones' memories alive if given the opportunity. I think teenagers might want to be protective of the adults around them. So, for example, if they think, oh, mum and dad are going to get really upset. I'm not going to have this conversation. I'm going to avoid this conversation because that might be upsetting. So it is about parents having discussions and reassuring young people, yeah, it's okay if I'm upset. You know, this is all right. Allowing feelings, isn't it? It's allowing those emotions to flow, isn't it? And reassure the young person that it's okay to have emotion if we're thinking about a person that we've lost.
That's something that often worries parents, getting upset in front of their children.
Yeah.
But I suppose what it tells the child is it's okay to be upset.
Yeah. I think there is something about normalising grief for children and young people, and I think that in our culture for quite a long time that we've tried to protect children too much from those feelings or experiences, and actually it's not harmful to expose children to grief and actually what it looks like, and even things like, so sometimes we see children who might be expressing their overwhelming feelings in anger, and then they feel ashamed and they feel bad, but actually for children, young people to know, do you know what, it's okay to feel angry, and to work with them to find new ways of expressing that anger.
When you're talking to children, I imagine language is very important.
Language is really important, and it's important to use the correct words around death and dying. You know, often in our culture we use words such as passing away or they've gone to sleep. And I think the sleeping thing can be quite distressing. You know, they might be even afraid to go to sleep themselves in case something's going to happen to them.
Yeah.
So they do need the right words, and that is tricky.
We know, particularly at certain ages, children take things very literally, don't they?
They absolutely do.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing is that you talked earlier about children's understanding of death. Young children, very young children who don't understand that death is a permanent thing, you may need to revisit the fact that this person's died quite a few times.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that it is repeating in the same way as you would repeat anything else that a child is learning or processing. Just thinking about some of the language we might use, like such as, oh, they've gone. And then, so what a young child might do, they might put that into different contexts. So it's kind of like, well, Auntie's gone. Have they died? Are they not going to come back? And so, yeah, I think even for little children, to
use the correct language.
Use the correct language and explain and repeat. And that can be quite difficult, can't it, if a young child's coming back over and over again with questions. But actually that's what we want children to do.
Yeah. I think it's probably helpful to talk about the best ways parents can support their children and young people through that process, because sometimes they will be grieving themselves as well. Often that's the case. What are the key things that they should be doing to support their children?
I think keeping those lines of communication open. I think for parents to understand that sometimes, just in the same way as it is for adults, that it's really difficult for children to put their feelings into words. It's like, how do you put that into words? You just can't do that. So it might be that children might be encouraged to express themselves in different ways. So it could be drawing pictures. It could be keeping a journal. It could be doing something creative for the person that they've lost. There's lots of different things that parents can do to encourage children, keeping them involved. Making a memory box together is really a lovely thing that can be done, or a scrapbook. You know, sometimes that doesn't have to involve lots of talking, because I think when children are overwhelmed with emotion, they can't think to put their emotions into words. They just can't. And actually it's a mess. And I think it's similar with adults, is it? How do you unpick that?
Yeah.
You know, you know, lots of people say to us, don't they, Anna? People say, oh, how do you feel today? And it's kind of like,
how do you answer that?
How do you answer that?
So the fundamental thing is to enable them to talk about the person that's died and to validate their feelings, whatever they are and however they come out.
Yeah, and it's giving children opportunities to explore those feelings and express them in different ways. So with little children, it might be that they play out their experience or what's happened or their feelings with little figures or through role play, and that's absolutely normal, and the child can explore that in a way. It's kind of outside the child. They're looking at it. It helps them understand it a little bit better because little children can't internalise their thoughts.
I suppose the other thing is that, as you said, children are in the process of developing. They're growing. Everything's changing for them. And as they grow and change and move forward in their lives, so will their grief and so will their response to what's happened. And perhaps it's important to say something about change and transition for children who've lost a key person in their life.
I think at different stages, if for a child that's lost a significant carer or a parent, that actually throughout their childhood at different stages as they grow and develop, they're going to have to reprocess that grief because they understand it in a different way. So a 6-year-old whose mum died, actually when they're 13 or 14, they're going to think about that in a different way, aren't they?
And understand the loss differently.
Yeah, they're going to understand it. So that might re-trigger their grief, and that's normal as well. And thinking about, you talked about transition points. So for instance, if a child is starting secondary school and they are experiencing their parents' palliative illness and maybe their death, that is going to have an impact on how much they're going to be able to manage in the early months of starting secondary school. Because actually, if you're not sleeping and it's really difficult to concentrate or you're preoccupied with other things, it can be really tricky to make new friends, to settle into a new school. So transition points can be quite difficult.
And as you say, those kind of reaching kind of milestones in their own lives and understanding the grief differently, it's really important that people are aware of that, isn't it? So this child who's lost their mum at 6 and is now 13 and is re-experiencing that grief, nobody may twig that that's what's going on for them, and they just think they're being difficult or they're depressed or whatever. But actually, to just be aware that this is a really ongoing process.
It is an ongoing process. I don't think that a child would ever get over the death of a parent, but what they will do is, their grief is not going to reduce. That's not going to happen. But their world will grow and they will develop and they will rebuild their lives alongside that grief. And it's having adults around that kind of understand the process around that. And that's not just families. That is kind of teachers and other professionals, isn't it, that are helping children.
Yeah. So it feels really important also to touch on the fact that there are children, there are young people who have more complex needs, more complex family situations, which is likely to have a significant impact on their experience of grief and how they manage that. And those children may need additional support.
Yeah, I think for some children who might have experienced multiple losses, that can be quite difficult. And I think if a child's lost a parent, there can be secondary losses, like the child might have lost their home, they might have a new carer, they might have to move to a new school, all these complexities. They might have additional needs, which might make it more difficult to process what's happening.
Yeah.
They can get an understanding of what's happening, but they might need more help within that. I think that the relationship with the person that the child has lost is important as well, because not all relationships are positive. Sometimes they're not positive, and the child might grieve their hope of that relationship might have blossomed into something. The child might have
Yes.
Thought, we're going to be able to repair this relationship. It's going to get better. But if the parent or somebody really close to them dies and they're not able to do that, that can make the grief more complicated. So sometimes children do need more specialist help, and sometimes they need support to unravel those complexities so that we can unlock their grief and then they can grieve normally and healthily.
Yeah, and that's a really important point, isn't it? Overall, that in general, grief, although incredibly distressing, distressing for adults, distressing for children, distressing to witness in children, is distressing. It is a normal process that, on the whole, we're hardwired to find our way through. But for some children, some young people, some families, it will be more challenging, and they may need the kind of help that you can offer through your work with the family support team.
Yeah, I think it's important not to kind of put a mental health label on all grief, because grief is normal, isn't it? And
it's not a pathology.
It's not, absolutely not. But for some children, it can impact on their mental health. But that doesn't mean that we can't turn things around. And I think extraordinary things do happen with children, young people and families.
You've seen that in desperate situations, haven't you?
And it's just, I think really for children, sometimes they just need the opportunity to be able to tell their story and explain what's happened to them. And I think as adults, it's important for us to think about what does this mean for the children? What do we need to do to make it better for children?
So as adults, we need to be brave.
Yeah.
We need to be brave. We need to be thoughtful and reflective, and work out the best possible way of supporting them.
Yeah. And that's difficult, isn't it? And we're asking a lot, aren't we?
Well, it's especially difficult when you're going through it yourself.
Yeah.
But, parents know their children. They're good at this stuff.
They really are.
Yeah.
They really are.
And there is resources that we have, that you have in the family support team, that can help them with that.
Yeah, we can help. We've got really good book lists. We might have examples of books that families might find helpful. We can direct to kind of national online resources, video clips, where parents can kind of look at that and reflect and think, actually, this is how I can do it. We can have conversations as well. I think it's important for Dorothy House patients to know that they're not alone in this. Especially, they can talk to their nurse specialists, they can talk to people on the family support team, that, we can be there to help through this.
So, Donna, if you were to sum up, what are, say, the 4 or 5 key things that you would like anybody listening to this to take away?
I think it's that the first one would be about thinking about how you can be honest with your children about what's happening. I guess the second one is really to keep children involved, to keep those conversations open. We talked about bite-sized conversations and giving children information, giving children some kind of control, really, over what they want to do. We talked a bit about end of life, didn't we? And children's choices, and asking them questions about what they want.
And the same goes for funerals as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Another tip would be involve people around the child, like their teachers, their school, other professionals that might be working with the child, so that it's like this wraparound. I call it wraparound support, so that children are being helped at home, in school, in the community, and that people, in a sensitive and respectful way, are aware of what's happening for that child or young person.
So Donna, just to finish up, what would you say to parents or carers trying to navigate this incredibly difficult process with their children or the young people in their family?
So what I would say is that don't be too hard on yourself. You will get there eventually. You've got your child's best interests at heart. Keep trying. You will be there. And use the resources within your family or even at Dorothy House. We can be there to support you.
Thank you, Donna. And I think the message to everybody listening to this, anybody who is going through this process, is that it's tough, it's hard for your children, it's hard for you, and it may feel overwhelming at times, but there is support there for you, and there is a family support team at Dorothy House who can help you. So if you feel as though you need to talk to somebody, if you feel as though you need some help with it, then just get in touch with us.